The situation in Ladakh over the last 10 days has gone from mass protests to one of brutal repression. 4 people were shot dead on September the 24th in Leh in police firing in the aftermath of a surge in public anger.
Frankly, as far as the Modi government goes, I don't know to what extent it was thought out.
Ladakhis across the political canvas broadly were happy at the bifurcation for sure. Do you think, and at the center also built on this by promising that so-called integration, and this is how this has been sold everywhere, right?
They saw a fault line, which was basically between Ladakh, including Kargil and Leh, Ladakh and Kashmir. And I think they, played it out to see. And of course, the reaction that they got only reinforced that they had made the right move.
How do you see the focus on the 6th schedule?
Why cannot that sized population be made happy in the very interests of national security? So Ladakhis didn't jump into anything. They studied it very carefully.
I want to ask you, it's not as if the 6th schedule is something which is unknown to the government of India. I mean, you have it operating in 4 states in the Northeast. And so it's an integral part of the Constitution, I would say a basic part of the Constitution. Do you think that the government feels that concessions shown to the people of Ladakh, statehood of course, I mean to my mind there's no question of giving Ladakh statehood before they gave it to J&K, but even the 6th schedule, right? I mean, if you grant 6th schedule protection, that's simply a fancy way of saying Article 370.
Negotiate and be done with it.
Hello and welcome to this special interview for The Wire. The situation in Ladakh over the last 10 days has gone from mass protests to one of brutal repression. 4 people were shot dead on September the 24th in Leh in police firing in the aftermath of a surge in public anger towards the union government and its failure to respond positively and quickly to what many people in Ladakh see as completely legitimate demands aimed at safeguarding the cultural and economic and political future of this sensitive region. Back in 2019, when Ladakh was carved out of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir and made a union territory, there were many in the region, in Ladakh, who welcomed what the Modi government had done, seeing this in some ways as an opportunity to push for the kind of autonomy and the kind of Ladakh-focused development that people had always felt within the region that Srinagar had denied them. Ladakh was part of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, and there was always this perception that the region was ruled from some distance and not always with the interests of the people of Ladakh and Kargil in mind. So in 2019, when the Modi government ended Article 370, bifurcated J&K and made Ladakh a standalone union territory, there was a feeling, a perception that somehow things would improve. And of course, over the years, people have slowly come to realize that that is not the case. People raised their demands initially through peaceful agitation, protests, dharnas, so on and so forth. The center engaged with them, but there was a perception that the center was dragging its feet and not really interested in the core demands of the people of Ladakh. And finally, of course, in the wake of Sonam Wangchuk's latest hunger strike, there were public disturbances which led to the death in police firing of 4 people. Joining me to discuss this sort of long arc of protest, repression that we've seen in Ladakh is Professor Siddiq Wahid. You are a leading scholar of Jammu Kashmir, of Ladakh, of the wider Central Asia, Inner Asia region. You've watched political and social and cultural developments for decades now. You are yourself from Ladakh, although you live and work in Srinagar, and you are also concurrently professor at Srinagar University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. And I want to start in a way with the current crisis, the standoff. A lot has been said and written about the immediate events leading up to the firing. I don't want to cover those or retread that ground. There's been a lot of disinformation too. But do you see what happened over the last 10 days as, in some ways, logical culmination of the past six years of political marginalization? Do you agree that the current unrest was predictable, even inevitable, given how Ladakh has been governed since 2019?
Well, I don't think that it was predictable, because the protests for the last 3 years, 4 years even, have been peaceful throughout. And not only that, but I think that each protest rally ended with, Jai Hind and all the markers of a nationalist group of people who were proud to be Indian and so forth. So from that point of view, I was not surprised. It was not expected on the thing. And so I was a bit surprised at the suddenness of it. And I think, and I've been thinking about why so suddenly. And a key factor may be that there may now be a transition from an elderly, shall we say, leadership on this UT front to a younger, and that is, anywhere from 45 onwards, crowd, who are getting impatient. And so this was largely a youth-led, although not exclusively youth-led. I think that they've made it, compared it to Gen Z and Nepal and all that. I think that that's not valid. So because in Ladakh it is a mixed thing. But when that happened, I was a bit surprised because of the pent-up anger that must have existed. And I don't know. We're still in the early days about who pelted stones first, or was it the gun firing first. But all in all, I was surprised that it was such a big, huge thing. And I didn't even hear about it until afternoon of the 24th, So then that did surprise me. And the people I spoke to, there was all chaos. And there was not chaos, but confusion as to why it was happening.
I mean, when you have long pent-up demands and people out on the street and, shall we say, nervous security forces, and there's been an influx in terms of security forces over the last few years, I suppose it's you have a recipe for this kind of chaos.
And that also, it was compounded by the fact that, suddenly all sort of range of ages were feeling that maybe Ladakhis, that we're being taken for granted, and that underestimating how important it was that the questions that had been posed and the sort of demands that had been made were well thought out. I mean, it wasn't just a spur of the moment or incited set of, demands.
Yeah. Now, I want to go back to 2019 and, the perceptions then, the aspirations, the response. I mean, Ladakhis across the, political canvas broadly were happy at the bifurcation for sure. They also saw, I think for them, the ending of the bifurcation was by far the most significant development. The ending of 370, which came along with that, is something that they, went along with. But the fact that they were free from Srinagar's control now, I think was seen as the start of a new chapter. Right. Do you think, and the center also built on this by promising that so-called integration, and this is how this has been sold everywhere, right? Integration, that this integration will lead to better governance, and the word development was thrown. Do you think the center, the Modi government, made a mistake in misreading what the Ladakhi people really wanted? In other words, that they were looking for empowerment as opposed to top-down administration, which is what bifurcation has brought. Is there a problem in how the center has read
I mean,
people's
quite
aspirations?
frankly, as far as the Modi government goes, I don't know to what extent it was thought out. They saw a fault line, which was basically between Ladakh, including Kargil and Leh, Ladakh and Kashmir. And I think they, played it out to see. And of course, the reaction that they got only reinforced that they had made the right move. The implications of what it means to be a union territory is spelt out in the very acronym of UT. It's controlled by the union, which means controlled by Delhi. And to be honest, I don't know how much we had thought out this in Leh as such, or what it would translate into in 2019, as opposed to how it had translated in other sections of the country.
Yeah, and particularly when it comes bundled together with the fact that there's no elected representation in that way, other than the Hill Council or whatever.
I don't know whether the government of India, in Delhi, thought through that either, and certainly Ladakh was caught by surprise in that suddenly everything had devolved and representation was minimal now. So
and so you don't have an administration officials who are accountable to anybody who is elected, and in many ways your ability to then ensure accountability goes out the window. Professor Wahid, civil society across both regions of Ladakh, in other words, Kargil and Leh, has broadly united around the demand for sixth schedule protection. To your mind, is this primarily an environmental demand? Is it sort of an assertion of democracy? Is it an assertion of cultural survival? How do you see the focus on sixth schedule?
I think the focus on sixth schedule is two things. One is rights, land rights, because they changed once it became a union territory. Employment rights, rights to representation, as you just mentioned. So all of that, it was discovered over a period because, Ladakhis didn't jump into anything. They studied it very carefully, as I was saying a little bit earlier. And so, they thought through it and then sort of made the demands, So I think that it was, once that started to sort of, after the sifting, it started to think, then the protests had a shape to it. This was with inputs both from Leh as well as Kargil. So it was, and when Leh and Kargil united, it was for the first time really in the struggle, so to speak. It was the first time in almost 45 years.
I'll come to the regional dynamics a little bit later, but just to underline for our viewers, the situation prior to the reading down or abolition of Article 370 in August 2019, when Ladakh was part of a unified J&K with 35A and 370 protections, was, correct me if I'm wrong, that the land of the entire Ladakh region could not be sold or acquired, could not be acquired by people from outside the region?
Well, I don't know whether that was spelled out. I don't remember it as having been spelled out. All I remember, as I was saying,
to the extent to which 370 and 35A
370, covered all of it. It was then, because it was removed from Kashmir, logically, it would also be removed from the other parts of the state, including Jammu. They were excluded. So, and I don't think there was an explanatory or some sort of a qualification of that, either for Ladakh or for Jammu. So it applied to all.
And of course, the domicile requirement. Once that went out of the window with 35A, who was eligible for jobs became a big question, which is why, in many ways, the cutting edge of the demand, the four demands, in many ways, the most urgent one was jobs and the need for some kind of domicile requirement. The Modi government dragged its feet on this for some time, and eventually, I think in June this year, reached some kind of an agreement with the apex body and with the Kargil Democratic Alliance that there would be reservation. There would be a domicile requirement of 15 years and reservation for local jobs. That still doesn't seem to have fully satisfied. I think people were holding out for 30 years domicile.
Yeah.
Well,
that was one.
Yeah.
But that, I think, was under discussion.
Right.
The key factor was sixth schedule and an added demand of statehood. Which was seen as being somewhat longer in the whole thing. And I think that came about because, it was, I think, discussed, that unless they got some sort of autonomy over the laws that govern them, some sort of a legislative set of sort of powers, then, it could be nixed at any time.
Yeah.
So they'd be back to square one. Yeah. So I think that this demand had come up, but even that demand was not very shrill, because Kargil and Leh, saw eye to eye on it, but they also both sort of said, okay, it's not something that's going to happen immediately. I mean, that kind of practical political sense.
The statehood demand.
The statehood demand, it was there, but they did assert that sixth schedule is something that the center itself promised. I'm not so sure when. Was it
the BJP promised it in 2019. The Lok Sabha elections and
right, exactly.
And I think even for the Hill Development Council,
yes,
I think the BJP took that position.
Yeah. So that, exactly, for that election. So that is a demand that is upfront, is because you guys said it and tell us. And when that didn't come up, then the sort of skepticism started to rise to suspicion. And then you have the tensions all coming.
I was speaking before this interview to the Wire's environment editor, Atira Perancheri, who's followed the whole sixth schedule movement quite closely. And I asked her for sort of the practical import in terms of land use that the absence of sixth schedule means. And she said already the union government, through the local administration, has opened up several blocks for mining of critical minerals. And recently, the Environment Ministry also released an office memorandum that exempted critical mineral projects from any kind of public hearing. So you can see how the rules are being rejigged without any public consultation, and why that would trigger public anger.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think and that suspicion regarding that was sort of whispered, shall we say, in Leh as early as a year and a half, 2 years ago. I remember hearing that saying, the land has been given away to corporates, there have been things. And all along I said, do we have any proof of this? Because it's going to be important and so forth. I never really, not that I pursued it with any vigor, because, it was something in the making. So I thought eventually it'll become public knowledge and then we'll know exactly what the score is on that. But so I never did see it. But that suspicion seems to be...
you can see all the building blocks we put into place.
Absolutely. Exactly, they were all sort of falling into place.
So let me ask you this. You said that the apex body people and the KDA people, visited the Northeast, visited Pondicherry to understand, how union territories work, how the sixth schedule works. And I want to ask you, it's not as if the sixth schedule is something which is unknown to the government of India. You have it operating in 4 states in the Northeast, and so it's an integral part of the Constitution. I would say a basic part of the Constitution, part of the basic structure. What explains the Modi government's reluctance to extend this kind of basic constitutional protection for tribal majority areas to a tribal majority area like Ladakh?
Ladakh, yeah. It's tough to explain. It's very hard because, what is Ladakh? Ladakh is 300,000 people. Yeah. That's not even half the size of defense colony in Delhi. And why cannot that sized population be made happy in the very interests of national security? Yeah. It's a simple sort of thing. And with proven no sort of demonization of Ladakhis has taken place. In fact, Indians in general love Ladakh and come, in large numbers to Ladakh. The only thing that I can explain is an inability to give up control and firm control over a border area. Which is, and over here we are not talking about border like, sort of, Arunachal would be or something like that, as if it's a white. It's like smack there, and it's the hottest place right now. So that would be the case. But in that case, there's nothing to suspect vis-a-vis the Ladakhis, no anti-national slogans, nothing of the sort. In fact, the opposite, So all I can think about is that, there's a suspicion on the part of Delhi that they don't want to give up control because they're not sure about the populational demographics in Ladakh as a whole. It's 50-50.
Explain. Yeah. So you have Leh, you have the Leh region, and you have Kargil.
Yeah, you have the two districts. Leh is approximately about 80% Buddhist and about 20% Muslim. These are figures, that are generally. Kargil is 85% Muslim and the rest Buddhist also. So there are, in both phases.
And both regions are roughly 1.5 lakhs each.
Absolutely. So what is the potential of if an assembly is put in place, in a UT with assembly, supposing for that, what are the potentials for decision-making powers over there? And, when you're hypersensitive about communal thing in Delhi, then you want to take precautions.
So are you saying they are questioning or have reservations about the nationalist credentials of a people who have resisted Chinese pressure on one border and the Pakistani pressure on the Kargil border? You have a proven record of these people fighting against foreign,
not just
ingress,
but being the supply line, to the army, being intelligence line to the army, and mind you, both Muslim as well as Buddhist. I mean, you'll see in the Kargil area during '99, Kargilis helped. I think in Turtuk, in now the Leh sector, Muslims were helping also. So it's really, it's hard for me to understand what that is.
I mean, in a sense, the BJP or the Sangh, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but looking at this as an analyst, because you see the imperatives of statecraft would tell you that this is a wrong decision, that here are people who are an integral part of India, as you say, who have proven time and again that they are second to none compared to any other Indian. Any other region in terms of defending India's borders, yet you are unwilling to empower them because of your ideological belief that somehow Muslims are not true Indians. It's hard to get away from this kind of an answer.
Yeah, being a Muslim, I hesitated to mention the, the onus being on the Muslims and so forth. But, I think that is ridiculous because there's nothing about Muslims in Ladakh which would be contrary to the Buddhists within Ladakh, So it's hard to tell as to what it is, and that really, makes me very concerned because is it then a case of power, corrupting, and one of my favorite translations of power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely is that of late we're seeing that power corrupts absolutely. And that's the fight that I think Leh is now having to face, or Ladakh, not just Leh, but Ladakh as a whole is having to face, and that makes me scared, because when you think about it, what are the global trends? We know the world is a mess, and one global trend is that the concentration of power in fewer and fewer hands, even in democracies, all the way from the US to, Nepal, we're looking at that, as a factor. The other is the centralization of the decision-making processes, which is sort of more and more with central or federally administered institutions making decisions about places as far away as Ladakh, not consequent to national security, but just about their everyday lives. Where do they graze? You know, how much should they be allowed to graze in their traditional spots? What kind of livelihoods, you know, and how do we guarantee livelihoods for them? So I think that that's the other sort of global trend that is coming. A third global trend is the coupling of governmental raw power and private fiscal power. You know, the coupling of them, which is the third element that is global. And the fourth one, I think, is the rising level of tolerance for, you know, state violence against its own people. And again, it's global. You know, when all those four converge in a place like Ladakh, it scares me to death. You know, as to what it would mean. Again, it's 300,000 people, for heaven's sake, you know, and it is, and any wall that has been built, whether it be Hadrian's Wall or whether it be the Great Wall of China, you know, have been built in order to keep people in, not just keep other people out, you know, and I think that those are some of the things that trouble me. And when I say scared, you know, I'm not cowering, you know, but it has implications for the entire Himalayan belt as to how do we look at it.
I wonder if there's another factor. You mentioned the Himalayan belt, but let's look at the J&K region for a second. Do you think that one of the factors or issues weighing on the Modi government's mind is the, I would say, the unsettled question of J&K. When I say unsettled, because the government believes it settled things by scrapping 370 and so on and so forth. But it knows that there are lots of unresolved questions. Even if you look at it in a very narrow sense, the promise of statehood has not been fulfilled, even though the government gave an assurance on the floor of Parliament and to the Supreme Court. Do you think that the government feels that concessions shown to the people of Ladakh, statehood, of course. I mean, to my mind, there's no question of giving Ladakh statehood before they gave it to J&K. But even the 6th schedule, right? I mean, if you grant 6th schedule protection, that's simply a fancy way of saying Article 370. And how do you then justify taking away protection from erstwhile J&K? Do you think this is that there's a guilty conscience at play, that the Modi government knows that it kind of pushed through a solution, quote unquote, for J&K that's untenable, and that this will unravel much faster if they show concessions or grant concessions to the people of Ladakh?
It could be. You know, I mean, I'm being perfectly honest when I say I don't really understand the Modi government or the BJP today, you know, as to how it is functioning and what are the priorities and so forth. So I worry about it. But I tend to, and I fear that sometimes I get cynical and I say, well, that's not a worry, you know, for this government. I mean, you know, they're happy to be inconsistent. I mean,
and in any case, the level of repression in the valley is so high that
that it's not,
nothing is happening, nothing is visible. Yeah,
there isn't, you know. So what's the harm in continuing, you know, with that inequivalence or whatever? Is that the right word? You know, so I don't know. It's a puzzle. I mean, it's a political puzzle. It's for me, it's a, you know, sort of like worry from the point of view of Ladakh, because it is such a small niche community, you know, and have very valid fears, you know, regarding their future as a culture, as a civilization.
You know, turning to regional geopolitics for a second, Sonam Wangchuk has spoken about Tibet. He's made broad comparisons looking at how the cultural autonomy and the sort of, you know, political, cultural, spiritual future of the people of Tibet has been overwhelmed by the fact that you have people coming in from all over China now. And he has expressed fears that the same thing may happen to Ladakh. To what extent, and we also have the post-2019 heating up of the LAC in the Ladakh region. Today you have I would say despite the government's claims, there are reports of continuing Chinese military presence in places like Depsang, Demchok, beyond what they were patrolling earlier or controlling earlier. To what extent have all of these, the growing assertiveness of China, to what extent have these played on the perceptions of people in Ladakh? And to what extent is that a factor in this current ferment?
It is a factor. I mean, without a doubt, it's a factor because they see that, first of all, the Ladakhis who are right on the boundary line, so to speak, are the most affected.
They're not able to graze.
Grazing,
Yeah, exactly.
rights have been now suddenly curtailed, both inside the LAC as well as outside, of course, because of the Chinese, the LAC. So I mean, I don't, it's definitely a fear amongst the Ladakhis that what will become of us as such, and China isn't exactly conceding that it has actually swallowed substantial tracts of land in Ladakh.
And even the government of India is silent on that. I mean, Prime Minister Modi's famous phrase that not koi aaya nahi, koi gussa nahi, exactly, koi kisi ka kabza nahi hai, which runs against the experience of people in Ladakh.
Exactly. It runs against them and then they wonder, So, yeah, I mean, it is both, geopolitical worries that they're now having, as well as internally, all the things that we've spoken about, educated youth not being able to find jobs and so forth.
You mentioned earlier the two regions and the fact that the Kargil Democratic Alliance and the Ladakh Apex Body have kind of are working together. For decades, these two regions were, if not at loggerheads, they had divergent political sort of priorities and aspirations. To what extent has the Modi government's post-2019 approach, either increased or reduced? To what extent has the Modi government's policies affected the dynamic between these two regions?
It's affected the dynamic most, for me as a Ladakhi, most proudly, by the fact that the two units have united. And I think that that's a central factor. I cannot, say how many rumors there were about how the two regions were going to separate. Since 2021, 1st of August 2021, when they united, there were many things that, there are fault lines reappearing again, and they never let it affect them, and they've gone on and on about it. So it has, ironically, united the two, and happily, at least from a Ladakhi perspective. And I think that that's one of the key takeaways for the future for Ladakh, is that it has to stay united, stay united and stay peaceful in its demonstration.
And one reflection of this is the demand for two parliamentary seats. Two members of parliament. One from each region.
Frankly, the needs of the two are very different, so why not have it? What's the I don't know what's holding it up from a constitutional point of view, but I'm sure that those can be, circumvented or reinvented, in the thing. So I think that that's it. But primarily, as you said a little bit earlier, it's the jobs, the youth, and the need for the youth to feel that they have a future, in Ladakh or anywhere in India. I mean, they're not, biased on that. They're willing to, do anything. But some light at the end of the tunnel, is something. And I don't know what the demographics are between young and old in Ladakh, but I'm sure, it's in the 30s and 40s area. And that's serious for a population.
Professor Wahid, you are a political scientist.
Please.
Siddiq, you are a political scientist. Your forte is the wider Central Asian region. But let me ask you a kind of political economy question. There's some talk among people, people who've looked at the Ladakh economy, that instead of focusing on things like mining and energy projects and so on, which is what the Modi government seems to be primarily interested in, a far more sustainable and stable form of employment maybe to focus or to double down on the current focus on responsible tourism. Is that something that you think would generate enough jobs, satisfy the aspirations of people?
I think you have to look at it in two ways. One is that the environmental concern, is very real. Because from what I gather, because I've asked, what does it mean, rare earths and some sort of minerals that you have and, dig out of the ground. And it says it mars the landscape. People have talked to me about it and said it. And Ladakhis are genuinely concerned about that because you don't dig into Mother Earth, so to speak, and deface it. I'm sure that in Buddhism, as well as in pre-Buddhist Bon practices, that was a no-no. And for example, blacksmiths who handle iron ore and so forth would say prayers before they go. And forget that, in agriculture, before you plow the land in the late spring, as it happens in Ladakh, there are prayers said, to forgive the unearthing, so to speak, of Mother Earth and so forth. So that's a very real concern. And it's just not aesthetics, So that's one. The other thing is tourism. Yeah, I think it would work beautifully in Ladakh if it was rationalized properly. If it was because what are we looking at? When you go to Ladakh, friends who go to Ladakh always say, well, so what do we see? I said, what you see is what you see on your drives. It's the landscape. That's 50% of sightseeing in Ladakh, So you have to look at, how the tourism can be promoted when you have that larger landscape to look at. And then only 5% of that land is arable. I thought it was 1%, but somebody said, no, it's at least 5, little over 4 and into 5. So 5% of the land is arable. So you can leave it untouched, but the rest of it is something, and I've crisscrossed Ladakh many times in my life. And, every time I go there, I feel, you really don't matter as an individual, who cares about you kind of thing, and it's a warm, good feeling, to have. And so if Ladakhis don't want that marred and taken apart from what it would mean from the point of view of importing labor and how it would change the character, of whatever little towns and urban areas that we have, it's a real concern.
Siddiq, I want to end this interview with a look at the road ahead. The arrest of Sonam Wangchuk under the National Security Act, to my mind, represents a kind of qualitative escalation, of course, because you're throwing the book at somebody who has been peaceful in terms of everything he's said and done. But you're also, the use of national security, right? You are now imprinting in the minds of people across India that there is something fundamentally illegitimate about the demands and aspirations of the people of Ladakh, that conceding them or granting them will somehow compromise national security. Assuming that the government now is going to, stick to this benchmark, and I sincerely hope they don't, and that the Supreme Court, which is hearing a habeas corpus matter, will order his release, but clearly the government has made up its mind. Where does that leave the leadership of the apex body and the Kargil Democratic Alliance? What options do they have? What civic strategies can they pursue in the face of this kind of a union government response?
Difficult to say. Yeah. I think just before, and in addition to what you said, of trying to accuse Sonam Wangchuk of anti-national activities and so forth. I was watching a video this morning, and there was a young man, I think he was from Kargil because the background looked like Kargil town, and he expressed his hurt at being called an anti-national. And that was the key factor that he drummed over again. And I mean, he drummed over 2 or 3 really good points also, but he drummed over the fact that we're being called anti-national. What is it? And then he said, I was in the forefront to help, I don't know during which war, one of the wars, but it must have been the latest, because he was not that old.
And one of the 4 men killed was in firing was a former soldier. Yeah?
Exactly, a former soldier. So I think what that does to the psyche of people is going to be, sort of playing a very big part. So I think there are other ways, to spur the economy in Ladakh. And like the Ladakhi demand is, it says, let us decide. I mean, we can do it. And sure, the center has a right to, advise or to, say certain things yes, certain things no, and so forth. But let that process unfold itself. I think that this picking a fight with 300,000 people who are not homogeneous by any standards, but at the same time who have coalesced on this issue of their identity. Not that anybody is going to listen in power, but the point is negotiate and be done with it, because that's all they're asking, and to have them wait for 4 years with meeting after meeting, changing meeting timings for the last minute, saying that is insulting, and I think that's the reaction on the part of Ladakhis these days.
Right. So negotiate, continue to negotiate. That should be the center's approach, and to deliver on promises that the BJP itself made.
I think that should be it.
Exactly.
And for Ladakhis to stay united and to continue to keep it peaceful. And I don't think that there's a problem with that, even with the youth. They are saying that, and in fact, in the same video that I was mentioning, he said, I don't believe in burning down offices, even if it is the BJP offices. So that's the sentiment you're getting. So why is this being pushed to the wall is a question.
Yeah. And it's clear that the people of Ladakh will need all the assistance that people in the rest of India can give. Institutions, particularly the judiciary, which has a great responsibility at this time.
I think the judiciary has a huge responsibility. I think the hearing on Sonam Wangchuk is on Tuesday. I hope it becomes positive, meaning releasing him, because, he is, compared to the others, he is of the next generation, and he is there in order to, he only talks peace, so what's the matter, there. And I think that handing it over, and talking about it with the apex body and the KDA, and interestingly, Sonam Wangchuk is not a part of either, which is an interesting position. I mean, I think positive, an interesting position for him to be taking. But certainly they're in communication. It's not as if they're not.
On that note, Professor Siddiq Wahid, thank you so much for coming to our studio and for taking part in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that ends this interview. We are, of course, at The Wire continuing to focus on the situation in Ladakh, both through ground reports as well as analysis, discussions, interviews, and so on. Please continue to watch The Wire's YouTube channel and to read our website, and, of course, to think about financially supporting the work that we do, because The Wire is non-profit journalism in the public interest, and this kind of journalism cannot exist and thrive without your commitment and support. Thank you very much for watching.